We're heading into one of the strangest stretches of weather this country has seen in quite a while, and honestly, I don't think most people are ready for what's about to happen. We are talking about a setup where violent thunderstorms and shockingly cold air are going to be sharing the stage at the exact same time, and on the other side of the country, a heat wave that simply refuses to quit. Today alone, we've got a corridor of scattered severe storms stretching all the way from the northern Rockies into the northeast, and these storms are going to be capable of producing damaging wind gusts along with a few pockets of large hail. But that's really just the appetizer. As we roll into the work week, a genuinely rare blast of Canadian air is going to come plunging south. And I mean rare for this time of year, because this cold shot is going to slam into the Midwest, the Ohio Valley, and the Great Lakes so hard that some spots could see their low temperatures crash all the way into the 30s. Meanwhile, if you're anywhere south of that boundary, especially down in Texas, there is simply no relief in sight from the heat that has been baking that region for what feels like forever. So what we're really looking at is a genuine weather battleground, forming across the middle of the country, with brutal heat pinned on one side and a shocking cold snap slicing in on the other. There's a lot to unpack here, so let's dive right into the forecast. I want to start with the overall pattern because there's a major flip happening in the atmosphere over the next 7 days, and it's the kind of setup that doesn't come around very often, especially in the middle of August. Right now, there's a big area of low pressure spinning over the Great Lakes, and the system is doing something you don't typically see this time of year. It's dragging a surprisingly potent shot of cold Canadian air straight down into the country. It is genuinely unusual to be talking about air this cold in the middle of August, but that's exactly the situation we're dealing with, because we've got a strong northwesterly flow pouring out of Canada right now. At the same time, there's a separate story playing out to the south, where a big area of high pressure has parked itself over the southern plains. That high pressure is essentially acting like a lid, trapping all the heat over Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico, and refusing to let it go anywhere. So while the south bakes under that dome of heat, we've got this massive pool of cold air sliding through the Midwest and into the Ohio Valley, and it's not done yet. It's actually going to strengthen even more as we move into Monday. For the rest of today, though, the main story along the East Coast is going to be showers and thunderstorms, and there is a real possibility that some of these storms turn severe. But when we get to Monday, that's when the cold really shows its teeth, because Monday is shaping up to be the coldest day of the entire week. We could be looking at temperatures dropping into the 30s across parts of Wisconsin and even into the upper peninsula of Michigan. And again, I have to stress this, we are talking about the month of August here. You almost never hear forecasters throwing around numbers in the 30s during August, but there are going to be spots where the low temperature settles into the mid to upper 30s, which is just a stunning number for this stretch of the calendar. As we push into Tuesday and Wednesday, the pattern is going to reshuffle itself once again. That high pressure system is going to stay anchored over the southern plains, which means the heat is going to keep getting trapped over Texas, Oklahoma, and the desert southwest. No relief coming for that part of the country anytime soon. Meanwhile, up north, we're going to see a broad area of westerly and northwesterly flow take over, but this particular flow pattern isn't necessarily going to usher in another blast of brutally cold air. Instead, what we're watching is a smaller low-pressure system that's going to track across the upper Midwest and into southern Canada. And this feature is the one that should bring at least some renewed severe weather into the Midwest on both Tuesday and Wednesday. My thinking right now is that Tuesday could feature some damaging wind events along with a few tornadoes possible near Minnesota and Wisconsin. And then Wednesday might end up shifting into more of a Great Lakes severe weather day, though a lot of that is going to hinge on exactly how that low-pressure system evolves as it moves through. Then, as we close out the week, it looks like we're going to get yet another surge of cold air diving into the Midwest as a fresh area of low pressure strengthens up over Canada. Now, I don't think this next shot of cold is going to be nearly as intense as the blast we're dealing with over the next 48 hours, but it's still worth keeping an eye on. Looking further out toward the very start of September, there is honestly a lot of uncertainty in the guidance right now. That said, a good number of the long-range computer models have been hinting at some kind of troughing pattern setting up across the western part of the country. If that trough does materialize the way some of these models are suggesting, we could see a return of severe weather that has the potential to be significant across the Great Plains. Before we get into the specifics of the storm threats this week, I really want to spend a moment on the temperatures. Because, honestly, this might be the single biggest story of the next several days. Down in Texas and Oklahoma, we are talking about genuinely oppressive heat, with Dallas expected to hit a high of around 107 degrees today. Now compare that to Detroit and Chicago, which are only expected to reach 72 and 73 degrees respectively. Think about that contrast for a second. That is an absolutely wild spread for this time of the year. But it's not just the daytime highs that are going to feel extreme, because tonight is going to turn genuinely chilly, especially if you happen to live anywhere in the Ohio Valley. Cities like Columbus, Cleveland, and Buffalo are all likely to drop into the 50s overnight. But if you're in Michigan, Wisconsin, or Minnesota, you could be looking at overnight lows dropping into the 40s. And in some spots, temperatures could bottom out as low as 35 degrees. That's cold enough that we could actually see some frost develop up in the upper peninsula of Michigan tonight, and there's even a chance that a few isolated pockets of northern Wisconsin could see some frost as well. So if you happen to have any sensitive plants or vegetation outdoors, tonight is definitely the night to keep a close eye on the forecast, because the temperature could dip low enough that you'll want to bring those plants inside to protect them. Heading into Monday and Tuesday, temperatures across the country are going to climb back up a little bit from these overnight lows, and honestly, I expect the heat to keep building as the week goes on, particularly down in Texas, where it's simply going to remain hot no matter what else is happening around the country. The Midwest and the Ohio Valley are also going to see their temperatures gradually climb back up as we move through the week. But then, right around the very end of the week, we're expecting another surge of cold air to drop back down into the Great Lakes and the Midwest, which should send temperatures tumbling once more into the 40s, 50s, and even some 60s for overnight lows. The good news, if you want to call it that, is that this next round of cold isn't expected to push as far south as the cold air we're experiencing right now over the next day or two. And then when we look ahead to the first week of September, there's a lot more uncertainty baked into the forecast, but the majority of the models are hinting that the warm air currently sitting over the southern plains is going to expand its footprint into the central plains, and it might even creep close enough to start affecting the Midwest. Still, for right now, the Midwest and Great Lakes have honestly been enjoying some of the nicest stretches of weather we've seen in the month of August in quite some time, and a lot of that has to do with all the storm activity and rainfall that's been rolling through, combined with these repeated shots of cooler air. So if you live anywhere in that region, you are probably loving what's happening outside your window right now. But on the flip side, the threat of severe weather is not going away anytime soon. This risk is going to persist starting with today and roll all the way through at least the middle of the coming work week. Let's talk specifics, starting with today, which is Sunday. Right now, we've got 3 separate slight risk areas laid out across the northern plains, and that includes Montana, Utah, and Nevada as well. In this region, we're going to be watching closely for significant damaging winds, potentially as strong as 80 miles per hour, along with the chance of some very large hail this afternoon. Elsewhere on the map, there's a marginal threat sitting over southern Arizona, another one positioned across the central and southern plains, one more stretching across the southeast, and finally, one more up in the northeast, where the primary concern today is going to be damaging winds. Those winds could also reach up to 80 miles per hour if you happen to be inside that hatched zone running from around Denver, Colorado, up into Montana. Outside of that specific zone, isolated damaging winds somewhere in the range of 60 to 70 miles per hour are still very possible. On top of the wind threat, there's also a risk of large hail today, and that threat is going to be concentrated mainly across the northern plains, where we could see a few supercell thunderstorms fire up this afternoon and produce hail as large as baseballs, especially in the corridor running from northeastern Colorado into southern North Dakota. As for tornadoes today, the overall threat should be quite low, but I'm watching a low-end tornado risk up in the northeast, and we'll circle back to that shortly. Looking ahead to Monday, we've got yet another sizable marginal risk area laid out across the northern plains that extends all the way into northern Nevada. There's also a separate marginal threat across the southeast, plus one more sitting over the state of Maine. The main concerns on Monday are going to be damaging winds, along with large to very large hail. The tornado threat for Monday is expected to stay low. Then, as we move into Tuesday, I think the focus of severe weather shifts squarely into the Midwest, particularly Minnesota and Wisconsin. And by Wednesday, that threat looks like it could migrate further east into the Great Lakes and Ohio Valley region. Now let's walk through the timing of all this storm activity day by day, starting with today. Along the northeast, we're expecting isolated severe storms to begin firing up as early as around 1 o'clock this afternoon, and that activity should continue through roughly 9 o'clock tonight. The main risk in this corridor is going to be damaging wind gusts somewhere in the range of 60 to 65 miles per hour, but I want to flag that there's also a chance of an isolated tornado or two, because there's going to be enough wind shear present thanks to that low pressure system parked up in Canada. So if you live anywhere near Hartford, Greenfield, or even Boston, Massachusetts, definitely stay alert throughout the middle to late afternoon and into the early evening hours today, because things could get a little rough in that window. The good news is that most of these storms should start to weaken after around 8 o'clock tonight, once the daytime heating that's fueling them starts to fade. And by the time we get to Monday, this particular storm system should be moving out of the area entirely, leaving behind just a few isolated showers and storms, with severe weather looking unlikely at that point. Meanwhile, out across the Great Plains, there's a chance we could see a fairly substantial complex of thunderstorms develop tonight across South Dakota. And if that happens, it could bring a meaningful damaging wind threat through the Sioux Falls and Sioux City areas. I don't think the tornado threat with this complex is going to be very high. This looks primarily like a straight-line wind event, but that doesn't mean it can't do real damage. So it's definitely worth taking the time to bring any loose items from your yard inside and to make sure trampolines are properly secured, because the last thing anyone needs is a flying trampoline in the middle of August. By Monday morning, that particular complex of storms out of South Dakota should be weakening. But we could see a fresh complex develop down across Arkansas and Mississippi during Monday afternoon and evening, and that one looks capable of producing an isolated damaging wind threat fairly similar to what those same areas experienced just yesterday, when straight-line winds caused a fair amount of trouble. On top of that, back over in the northern plains, Monday should also bring a few supercell thunderstorms capable of producing large hail and damaging wind gusts, with a low tornado threat possible near Bismarck, Pierre, and Mobridge. So there's at least a small chance we could end up going live to cover storms on Monday. But if I had to pick the day that deserves the most attention over the next 3 days, it would be Tuesday. This is genuinely shaping up to be the day with the highest likelihood of live storm coverage on this channel, and that's because we've got a low-pressure system spinning over the Winnipeg area that's going to help fuel storm development. I expect a few supercell thunderstorms to fire up during the late afternoon over Minnesota, and at least 1 or 2 of those storms should form. If they do develop the way I'm expecting, they'll have access to enough wind shear to support a low-end tornado threat. That window of activity should kick off around 5 o'clock Central Time, and could run through around 9 or 10 o'clock, depending on exactly how long these storms are able to sustain themselves in that environment. Outside of the tornado potential, damaging winds are going to be the main concern with these storms. At the same time, back over in the Central Plains near Nebraska, we're expecting a fairly large cluster of thunderstorms to develop Tuesday afternoon, and this cluster looks capable of producing straight-line damaging wind gusts as strong as 75 miles per hour, along with the possibility of isolated large to very large hail. That cluster should begin to weaken as it pushes into southern Kansas overnight Tuesday into the very early hours of Wednesday. Once we get past Tuesday, that same storm system tracking across the Midwest is likely to bring another round of isolated to scattered severe weather on Wednesday, and this activity could stretch all the way from central and eastern Missouri back into Michigan. There's a real chance this system could impact the Chicago area as well, bringing damaging wind gusts along with a low but not negligible tornado threat. Then, as we move into Thursday and Friday, I expect at least a few more rounds of showers and thunderstorms to develop along the East Coast, with more isolated, severe weather remaining a possibility during that stretch. Looking even further ahead to next weekend, there's a real chance that a larger, more organized storm system could return to the Midwest and Central Plains. While we're on the subject of severe weather, I have to bring up just how remarkable of a year it has been for Illinois specifically. It really has felt like the year of Illinois when it comes to tornadoes. Just a couple of days ago, we saw another tornado touchdown in northern Illinois. And honestly, at this point, that kind of news shouldn't surprise anybody. Illinois has recorded more than 200 tornadoes so far this year, and that number absolutely shatters the state's all-time record, beating it by more than 60 tornadoes. To put that in perspective, the previous peak year for tornadoes in Illinois saw a total of 142, and this year has already blown past that number by a wide margin, sitting above 200. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if the state ends up tacking on another 10 to 15 tornadoes before this year is done. Now let's shift gears and talk about what's brewing out in the Atlantic, because as we head into the first week of September, there's a decent chance we start seeing some bigger storm systems develop across the country again, and that includes something forming out in the tropics. If you look at the far right side of the screen on the model guidance, the GFS model, along with a number of other models and several ensemble groups, are all hinting that our next hurricane of the season could actually take shape sometime over the next week or two. At an absolute minimum, it's looking increasingly likely that we'll see at least a tropical storm develop somewhere in the Atlantic basin. Right now, the odds of some kind of formation over the next 7 days sit at around 50%. And the general area we're watching is in the direction of the Lesser Antilles. A lot of the model guidance right now shows this system eventually curving out to sea without ever threatening land, but there are also some models that bring it closer to the east coast of the United States. So this is definitely something we need to keep tracking closely as the trends develop over the coming days. Regardless of exactly where it ends up going, this system does appear to have the best chance we've seen so far this season of becoming something more substantial than just a weak, low-end tropical storm. A lot of that is going to come down to wind shear, because strong wind shear can tear a developing system apart before it ever gets the chance to organize. The The encouraging, or maybe concerning part of this story is that the wind shear across the region where the system is expected to develop looks like it's going to weaken noticeably around the final couple of days of August. That means there could genuinely be a window here for this system to strengthen into a hurricane. So stay tuned, because we're going to continue tracking this system closely, and we'll keep everybody updated as it tries to organize and develop. This is exactly the kind of system we need to keep firmly on our radar, precisely because it does have a real shot at becoming a hurricane out in the Atlantic. And beyond just the strength question, there's also a real possibility that this system eventually interacts with land in some form, whether that ends up being Bermuda, the Lesser Antilles, or even the United States itself. That outcome is very much still on the table. At this point, based on the model trends and the majority of ensemble members, the most likely scenario still has the system staying out to sea, or potentially brushing Bermuda later on in its life cycle. But I want to be clear that these kinds of long-range trends can and often do shift over just a few days. The honest truth is that nothing has actually formed yet, and until an actual tropical depression or storm takes shape, we genuinely have no way of knowing for certain how strong this thing will get or exactly where it's going to track. There's a real possibility this system could shift further south over the next 24 hours, or it could just as easily continue trending northward instead. It's also entirely possible that what actually develops ends up being a weaker system altogether, rather than a full-fledged hurricane. That said, there are a handful of ensemble members out there right now that are showing this eventually strengthening into a major hurricane, but I want to stress that outcome is still more than 7 days away at this point, and a tremendous amount can change between now and then in terms of both track and intensity. So just stay tuned to the channel, and we will absolutely keep you updated with the very latest information as it comes in, without any unnecessary hype attached to it. And that's going to wrap up today's forecast. As always, thank you so much for tuning in and watching. If you're new here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our storm coverage or forecast updates moving forward. And if you're looking for a reliable way to stay ahead of these storms as they develop, I definitely recommend checking out the free Weatherfront app. You can simply scan the QR code on your screen if you're on an iPhone, and the app is also available for Android users, as well as on desktop. So go ahead and check that out, and we will see you in the very next video, or possibly live on the channel if these storms end up cooperating with our forecast.